Hey, I'm Rob Witcher from Destination Certification, and I'm here to help you pass the CISSP exam. We're going to go through a review of the major topics related to the alignment of the security function to business goals and objectives. This is the first video in our complete set of MindMap videos. This MindMap series is meant to help you review the key topics you need to know to confidently pass the CISSP exam. There are 2 other MindMap videos for Domain 1, and a total of 30 of these MindMap videos. I've included links to all the other MindMap videos in the description below. Before I launch into this first MindMap, I'd like to give you a critical bit of advice that will make it massively easier for you to study for and confidently pass the CISSP exam. You need to have the right mindset in your studies, and especially on the exam. CISSP is a management level certification, so you need to be really careful not to think too technically. You need to think like a CEO. I'll explain this critical mindset more at the end of this video. All right, so starting high level and thinking like a CEO would, let's launch into this first mind map and define corporate governance. Corporate governance is the system of rules, practices, and processes by which an organization is directed and controlled to achieve its goals and objectives that are typically focused on increasing the value of the organization. So fundamentally, corporate governance is about ensuring an organization has clear goals and objectives, and everyone in the company is aligned towards achieving those goals and objectives. Security governance, then, is the system of rules, practices, and processes by which the security function is directed and controlled. A crucial part of security governance is aligning the security function to the overall organizational goals and objectives, so that security can help the business achieve its goals and objectives. So that security is an enabler for the business. This is something crucial that we always need to keep in mind as security professionals. Our job is to help the business achieve its goals and objectives, to be an enabler for the business. We don't want to be the shop of no. We shouldn't always be telling the business, no, you can't do that, it's too risky. We should ideally be saying something more like, here's the risk, and here's how we can help you mitigate those risks so that the organization can achieve its goals and objectives. So now you know the focus of security, to help the organization achieve its goals and objectives, to be an enabler to the business, to help increase the value of the organization and not just be a cost center. A critical part of governance is having clearly defined roles and responsibilities, so people know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, what they're accountable for, and what they're responsible for. Let's spend a few minutes here on these terms, accountability and responsibility. These are terms often used interchangeably, but there is actually a massive difference between them that is very important to understand from a security perspective. Let's start by defining accountability. Accountability means the ownership of something. Accountability means the ultimate answerability, blameworthiness, and liability. Put simply, accountability is where the buck stops, the throat that gets choked if something goes wrong. And really crucially, accountability can never, ever be delegated. The owner of an asset is accountable for the security of their asset, and they can never delegate that accountability to a subordinate, contractor, or service provider, or anyone else. They can't delegate their accountability to anyone. What can be delegated is responsibility. The responsible party will implement and enforce controls based on the direction of those that are accountable. A perfect example is a public cloud service provider. The CSP will be responsible for storing, processing, and securing a customer's data, but ultimately, the customer remains accountable for the security of their data. The customer cannot outsource the accountability for protecting their data, but they can delegate the responsibility. The concept of accountability versus responsibility is going to come up again and again and again. It's crucial to understand the difference. Due care is the responsible protection of assets based on the goals and objectives of the organization. Due diligence is the demonstrated ability to prove due care to stakeholders, upper management, regulators, customers, shareholders, etc. There's an interesting bit of security history related to import-export controls. I'm wildly oversimplifying here, but essentially during the 1970s and 80s, some amazing advancements were happening in cryptography. Super secure new algorithms like DES were being created, and whole new amazing techniques like asymmetric cryptography were invented. These new algorithms and techniques essentially allowed data to be encrypted such that no one in the world could decrypt it, including organizations like the NSA, who wanted to be able to decrypt and read anyone's data. I need to stop picking on the NSA here. They might be listening. So laws were put in place to restrict the export of certain cryptographic algorithms and systems to make sure that they didn't get in the hands of, say, Soviets. These are serious laws, and violations could see you thrown in federal prison. So that's the history of it. The two major export laws you need to know about are ITAR and EAR. They both restrict the manufacturing, sales, and distribution of specific technologies, products, software, and services. These laws restrict the export of certain cryptographic systems. ITAR, the International Traffic in Arms, focuses on the export of defense articles, things like missiles and satellites, technical data, and defense services. Keyword there related to ITAR is that it focuses on defense-related items. EAR, the Export Administration Regulations, regulates dual-use items not covered by ITAR, but also still applies to some defense-related items. The Wassenaar Arrangement is very different from ITAR and EAR. Importantly, the Wassenaar Arrangement is voluntary, not a strict law. And it's also a multinational agreement between 42 signing members, 42 countries. The Wassenaar Arrangement is a voluntary export control regime where signatories exchange information on transfers of conventional weapons and dual-use goods and technologies. Now, another type of law that is very relevant today, transborder data flow laws, also commonly referred to as data residency laws or data localization laws. These laws are focused on restricting or preventing the flow of data across physical borders. For example, many countries require that the personal data collected from their citizens be stored on systems within their country. Privacy is not a massive topic on the CISSP exam, but it is large enough to warrant its own MindMap. So for now, I'll simply say you cannot achieve privacy without security, and we'll talk more about privacy in the next MindMap video. Ethics are very important to address as part of your security program. Organizations want their employees to act ethically and consistently. The challenge is that each of us have very different ethical values. So for an organization to have consistent ethics across all their employees, they must codify their ethics, write them down in a policy. Policies are essentially corporate laws. We'll talk about that more in a moment. What are ethics based on? A good answer is that ethics are based on doing nothing that is harmful to anyone else. Now, this part is critical to memorize for the exam. The ISC² Code of Ethics. ISC² takes this very seriously. It is a requirement of you becoming a CISSP that you agree to abide by this Code of Ethics. ISC² wants to make sure that you know this Code of Ethics and how to interpret them. So you're going to see at least a question or two about these on the CISSP exam. I'm going to read them out here. Memorize the wording and the order. They are meant to be acted upon in order. Number 1, protect society, the common good, necessary public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure. Number 2, act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. Number 3, provide diligent and competent service to principals. Number 4, advance and protect the profession. Let's now get into an important discussion of policies. And as I mentioned earlier, policies are essentially corporate laws. Policies are how we direct behavior within an organization. Policies tell people what they must do. The overarching security policy defines an organization's overall approach to security. The overarching security policy is provided and supported by the board of directors and senior management. The policy defines the goals and objectives for the security function and ensures security is aligned with the overall business goals and objectives. Functional security policies, on the other hand, are more detailed policies that address specific security requirements and practices, such as access control, encryption, incident response, and data backups, etc. An organization will have a functional policy for each of these and many more. Good policies are simple, easy to read documents that state Simple rules such as every laptop must have malware protection. Policies are corporate laws. Policies tell people what they must do. Standards define specific mandatory hardware and software mechanisms. For example, an organization standard might be that Norton antivirus is the required anti-malware solution for all Windows laptops. Procedures are step-by-step mandatory actions. For example, an organization could have a procedure for how to install Norton antivirus on Windows laptops. The exact steps must be followed to correctly install and configure the anti-malware software. Procedures are essentially a step-by-step set of instructions, actions for how to do something. Baselines are minimum levels of security and define mandatory configurations for security mechanisms and products. For example, an organization could have a configuration baseline for Windows laptops. The configuration baseline is essentially a checklist of all the things that need to be done to correctly configure and lock down a laptop before it starts being used. For example, the configuration baseline would require that at a minimum, the host-based firewall be enabled, certain patches be installed, the Norton antivirus be installed and configured correctly. By the way, I keep mentioning Norton here in the hopes of getting sponsored, so if you're listening, Norton. All right, guidelines. Guidelines are recommended actions. Recommended, listen carefully here, guidelines are not mandatory. They are what someone should do, not what someone must do. Guidelines are useful when an organization knows they should be doing something, but they haven't fully implemented it yet. So, for example, the organization might want to have multi-factor authentication for all administrative accounts. But if there are systems that don't support that yet, the organization is setting itself up for failure if they create a mandatory requirement for multi-factor authentication for admin access to all systems. Instead, the organization can create a guideline. It would be good to have MFA for admin access to all systems, but it's not a requirement yet. Risk management is a super important topic. Risk management is a critically important tool that we use as security professionals to help us figure out how to best protect the assets of the organization with the limited resources that we have. There's a MindMap dedicated to risk management, and I'm mentioning it here as risk management is a critical part of security governance. Procurement. Security must be involved in the procurement process, right from the start of the process. This starts with understanding and validating the business requirements for whatever is being procured. If it's a service being procured, then the security requirements are defined in the SLR, the Service Level Requirements document. The requirements documented in the SLR will be used in the procurement process to evaluate how well each service meets the security requirements. Once a particular service provider is selected, then the requirements listed in the SLR will be translated to a new document, the SLA, Service Level Agreement. The SLA is an addendum to the legally binding contract, making the SLA legally binding as well. The SLA describes the services to be provided, the service targets, specific responsibilities, etc. Critically, the SLA is used to clearly communicate requirements to a service provider, to say, hey, service provider, I need you to make sure you're doing this, that, and the other thing. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, accountability can never be outsourced, but responsibilities can. So the SLA is a crucial document that the owner of an asset uses to make sure the service provider clearly understands their responsibilities. Who is responsible for security? The answer? Everyone. This is absolutely true. Everyone is responsible for security. But it's not good enough to just say, hey, everyone's responsible for security. Everyone needs to know what specifically they're responsible for from a security perspective and how they're supposed to do whatever it is they're responsible for. And that's why we have the last little piece to talk about here, awareness, training, and education. I'm going to give you succinct definitions of each. Awareness is an informal process of communication, such as emails, posters, etc., with the goal of changing cultural sensitivity to a given topic or issue. For example, making employees aware of this thing called phishing, and that they should be careful of what links they click on in emails. That's a good example of awareness. Training is semi-formal and provides specific skills necessary to perform something related to security. For example, if a company buys a bunch of Cisco firewalls, then some employees are going to need to be trained on how to deploy and manage Cisco firewalls. This is training, specific skills. Finally, education is about teaching fundamental concepts. Our CISSP Masterclass is a perfect example of education. We teach folks the fundamental concepts of security so they can be better security professionals and pass the CISSP exam. All right, that is an overview of security governance within Domain 1, covering the most critical concepts you need to know for the exam.
As an added bonus in this first MindMap video, I want to share with you the most important advice I can give you for passing the CISSP exam. You need to approach your studies, and especially the exam, with the right mindset. As I said, the CISSP is a management level certification. If you answer the questions on the exam with a technical mindset, you will very likely fail, unfortunately. So how should you approach your studies? And most importantly, the exam? By thinking like a CEO. I made a video on this mindset of thinking like a CEO, which you can watch for free by clicking on the link in the description below. I would highly recommend that you take a few minutes to watch the video. We've trained and guided thousands of people just like yourself to confidently pass the CISSP exam over the last 20 plus years. And we've received hundreds of emails over the years from our students saying things like, thinking like a CEO worked. It was the single biggest factor that helped me pass the exam. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. I know it works, and it will help you pass the CISSP exam. So check out our free Think Like a CEO video. Link is in the description below. All the best in your studies.